Next, we're going to hear from some of our partners about specific types of analytics modernization that will improve business agility today. I'd like to welcome Ramesh Indraghanti, Senior Director of Platforms and AI Engineering at Capgemini, Saurabh Abhyankar, EVP and Chief Product Officer at MicroStrategy, and Ravi Shankar, Senior VP and Chief Marketing Officer at Denodo. And to lead the conversation, our Yellowbrick VP of Business Development, Alan Holmes.
Welcome to Answers, everybody. This is the Ecosystem Roundtable. I have three industry leaders in data analytics to join us on the panel today. So let's meet the panel. So Ravi, can you introduce yourself? Maybe a brief comment?
Sure, happy to be here, Alan. My name is Ravi Shankar. I'm the Senior Vice President and Chief Marketing Officer for Denodo.
Thank you. Ramesh, how about a few words?
Hey folks, my name is Ramesh Indraghanti. I'm a Chief Cloud Data Architect with Capgemini. Been in data management space for a long time.
Yeah. Thanks, Ramesh. And how about you, Saurabh?
Yeah, hi everyone. First of all, thanks for joining us. So I'm the Chief Product Officer here at MicroStrategy, and I hate to say it almost, but I've been in the industry now for I think 17 years in analytics, and still loving it. So I'm happy to be here with you all.
Great, thanks guys. So let me do this. Before we jump into questions, I'd like to define what I call the challenge. So in today's business models are being stressed in new ways. Business continuity requires a pandemic response. Digital transformation improves competitiveness. Hybrid and multi-cloud adoption continues to increase, and business intelligence require real-time answers. So Ramesh, what are you hearing from customers, and how are customers preparing for this challenge?
Yeah, I mean, that's a loaded question with a lot of dimensions to it, right? But mostly what we're seeing with customers is there's a lot of desire to go towards digital transformation. It's mostly business transformation that is kind of flavored with my focus in financial industry, a lot of financial transformation and then digital transformation. So the way I look at it is the drivers are primarily business transformation, which are compelling customers to look at all these hybrid multi-cloud architectures you talked about. And let's face it, it doesn't matter whether your data, enterprise data is on-prem or in one cloud or hybrid multi-cloud. The intent eventually is to derive insights into the data. And the desire to derive insights is getting intense. And of course, there's smarter and smarter tools, right from relational semantics to the complex ML/AI insights that you get into data. So there's a combination of things going on here. Business intelligence continues to be a compelling theme. And I see that BI, analytics, reporting is all becoming very fuzzy now. There's no clear demarcations any longer about traditional reporting versus analytical insight, because the whole data ecosystem is kind of evolving into flux. It's no longer about databases, about database platforms. So a lot of complex things happening in this space.
Oh, great. Thanks, Ramesh. How about you, Ravi? Anything to add?
Yeah, so I would classify, three challenges that I actually hear from my customers. One is the need to have real-time quick decision making. So especially in the current environment, as you know, COVID was upon us for a very quick way, and we all had to pivot our businesses very rapidly. So for that, you need to have a very good understanding of the business and what are the things that you actually change and can change and quickly affect. So that's number one. Number two is self-service. As you saw, gone are the days when the business teams have been so reliant on the IT, which usually takes a long time to turn things around. So the business has been asking for quite a while to enable them to do things by themselves rather than having to be reliant on the IT. So the self-service movement has started, and I think it is gaining full force. The last one I would say is business continuity. So if you look at IT and the technology landscape keeps changing, right? So there are new tools that are always coming. There are new trends, and the IT, in order to keep the business competitive, they need to innovate. They need to add these new technologies. But when they do so, the first ones that are affected as a result of that are the business users. So either they have to pause or they have to live with less functionality. So that's another challenge. So they are looking, both the IT and the businesses are looking for solutions that will overcome these three challenges.
Great. Hey, thanks, Ravi. Hey, Saurabh, you kind of end up, as Ravi was mentioning, about business users. You spend quite a bit of time with business users. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think the main thing really is, all assumptions are being tested right now. And so if you think about sort of analytics, for the longest time, you kind of got your report, you got your dashboard, and the data was a little bit like, from a human perspective, a little bit predictable. You kind of knew what you were going to get within some boundaries, right? And then all of a sudden, things changed quite a bit. And really there's sort of two things that come to mind. The first thing I did when this all started is I did like a virtual tour, and I spoke to dozens of customers just to try to get a feel for what's going on. And I realized I didn't know what was going on. And then the first thing is to sort of reiterate what Ravi was saying is really freshness of data. And so we went from ETLing, once a week or whatever it was for any given organization, to suddenly needing to do it every single day because the data was literally changing every single day, especially for some of our customers that were in retail or finance. The freshness of data was a key thing. And I think we're going to see that once you get used to real-time data, you don't really want to go back to once a month ETL. So that was one big thing. And the second thing that we saw, which was a bit surprising actually, in hindsight it's not, was the type of analytics that people were doing. And so they started doing a lot more analytics around like density analysis, the location of people. A lot of our healthcare providers were trying to figure out how many people are in any given building. They're trying to figure out how to do COVID tracking, employee tracing, but not like, not in a big brother kind of a way, but just being able to, see the relationships, who was in the same office together, things like that. And so those are the big changes that we saw, real-time data being a big one. And then just the nature of analytics changed quite a bit. As well. And then, obviously things like geospatial analytics becomes more important and those kinds of things.
Yeah, great. Well, us at Yellowbrick, we love real time. So I love that answer. So, thanks, guys. So my next question to you, Ravi, is, how can customers leverage hybrid or multi-cloud to improve their data analytics? And I know, as I mentioned earlier, you've done some work with the cloud. So I look forward to your insights on some of the survey work that you've been speaking about recently.
Yeah, so we have been doing annual surveys with our customers, and this is earlier this year we did it for the third time, and there were some very quite revealing facts in there. So definitely hybrid is the way to go. So there are a lot of customers transcend that particular world. For us, it came to be something around 42% of the customers are purely on a hybrid, and when you mix in like the multi-cloud, so the hybrid cloud and the multi-cloud kind of goes hand in hand, and the multi-cloud is becoming more popular. So when you add that, that comes to about like 60 to 70% of the customers that are actually using some form of cloud. So that has increased year over year for us when we have been doing the surveys. Now, if you look at some of the customers that have kind of moved on to such a configuration. So one example would be Logitech, which is a customer of ours. They started about like 6 years back, I would say, a cloud-first mandate of moving all the technology from on-premises to the cloud. And in doing so, they first of all needed the ability to sustain the business while the change basically happens, because it's a major shift, 6 years back. So they used data virtualization as the abstraction layer that enabled them to make the migration one by one, the data warehouse, their MDM solutions, all those things started transitioning to the cloud. And eventually the data virtualization solution also was moved on to the cloud itself. So they were able to migrate within a span of like 2 to 3 years their entire portfolio across the world. So as you know, that global company they have multiple different offices around the world. All the technology, they were able to move it successfully to the cloud and minimize the disruption to the business while they were actually making this change. So that was a great one. So another one I talked about was on the self-service side. So we have another bank called Seacoast Bank, and they actually use data virtualization to enable a lot of the self-service aspect by making the data available to the business users to quickly turn it around rather than having to be reliant on IT. So all these, they were able to leverage the cloud, the self-service aspects to overcome some of the challenges with the data virtualization layer.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you. And how about you, Saurabh? What are you thinking?
Yeah, so I mean, again, I've been around long enough to know that there is no sort of altruistic answer to these questions, right? So, people start off and say, oh, I'm going to put everything in my data warehouse, and they say, I'm going to put everything in my data lake, and then they say, I'm going to move everything to the cloud. And the reality is, those projects are not usually very smart. And so what we see over and over again is honestly, when we talk about hybrid, what it really means is do what you need to do. Right, leave certain bits of data on-prem because it's best on-prem, because either because of the technology or the security or a number of different factors, or you just don't want to change it. If you're adopting new cloud technologies, if you're adopting, Snowflake, or if you're adopting ServiceNow or Salesforce or Workday or applications up there, leave the data up there. What a hybrid really allows you to do, just like any kind of virtualization layer, is allows you to leave the data where it is and only move what you need to move to achieve the goal that you have. And it sounds like a really simple kind of a thing, but the worst thing that anybody can embark on is some massive, in the middle of all this, some massive data warehousing project or a massive data lake project that's going to take you, 2 years. I remember customers that embarked on these massive data warehousing projects, and when they were done, they realized the data warehouse was way too slow because put way more into it than they ever expected.
That's right.
And then they had to build a bunch of data marts on top of that. And then, and HANA came along. Right. You know what I mean? So, for the most part, leave the data where it is and virtualize as much as you possibly can.
No, that's excellent. Hey, Ramesh, how about from you got a very broad perspective. You see a lot of customers, kind of end to end. So, what are your thoughts?
Yes. So I think there are a lot of recurring themes that I see about which both Ravi and Saurabh are talking. But in my mind, this notion of hybrid cloud is not a conscious manifestation by enterprises. A lot of times it does happen, but I would think majority of hybrid clouds or by virtue of how the enterprise can spin off from the data center to public cloud. They don't often control or have the insights to control those dynamics. So invariably, you land up with a hybrid architecture. With the intent, with lean and efficient enterprises, they have the ability to slowly and gradually move all the assets into public cloud. But it's easier said than done for large enterprises. So they will land up grappling with a hybrid cloud architecture where you have critical assets split both within on-prem as well as in the public cloud. And we've seen some customers who are off the bat very smart about what their data topology in the grand scheme of things is going to look like. So they are multi-cloud by aspiration and design. But that's again a small minority of customers who have the time, wherewithal, and the chops to do it. But there's some other customers who are multi-cloud by virtue of acquisitions. So we have seen customers who have gone into, let's say, AWS, and they have acquired something. There's a critical data asset from a different line of business that is now part of this enterprise sitting in, let's say, Azure or GCP. So that's where some of the complex challenges are for enterprises to make a decision about how do we resolve, do we move these assets and redeploy the entire solution architecture for a line of business, or if we keep it there, how do we be smart about it? And I'm sure, virtualization technologies and complex multi-cloud replication technologies are all playing a big place, big role in this space. So that's my general perception of how the hybrid cloud, multi-cloud is evolving. And data analytics, as you know, is all pervasive. It doesn't matter you're hybrid, you're on-prem, you're split between multi-clouds. The desire for the business doesn't care really where you are. They keep asking questions and you have to answer them. So the belief and the hope throughout is that with this auto-scaling, elastic computing paradigms across all these cloud ecosystems, you now, as a technology organization, have the chops to respond to business with the speed of business. But that's what is happening, I think.
One point, Alan, I would like to throw in there, this, the terminology of hybrid cloud has evolved in the sense that we talked about it from an on-prem and cloud perspective, but now some of the people associate the private cloud and the public cloud as a hybrid cloud. So they talk about it from that particular perspective as well. So just to say that there are different definitions and the definitions keep evolving.
Yeah, to that point, Ravi, sorry, Alan, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, Ravi brought a good point, which is, the customers, some of the customers we're seeing who are planning well, they are actually building cloud native capabilities within the on-prem tech stack, right? Yeah. I'm talking about 4 or 5 years ago, right? Be it Docker containers or any kind of container-based packaging, bringing DevOps into the big data lakes. So they're kind of getting geared towards lifting and shifting some of these compute loads into public cloud with the least amount of change to deal with. So that's truly the hybrid cloud, because you now have private cloud with cloud native technologies. Totally agree with you.
Yeah, I think the other thing that's matured a bit is what is cloud, and I think everybody thought it was the public cloud, and there's so much more to it. And I think we're starting to really peel the layers back on what cloud means and how it gets deployed. And you guys have done a wonderful job of articulating, I think, some of the scenarios that are going on. And Saurabh, you mentioned modernization. I'd love to maybe just as a follow-on, what are you guys seeing is around modernization? Are companies starting to really kind of grasp it and understand the value of modernizing not only the data infrastructure, but also kind of in and around from an application and a broader sense?
Yeah, actually, you bring up a good point.
Go ahead.
You bring up a good point around the definition of cloud, and I think where it's evolved, there was this altruistic, it must be this, and this, right? It must be multi-tenanted, it must have performance isolation, it must be subscription, it was all these definitions. That's now, right. I think what we've actually evolved to is the value proposition of the cloud, right? That it's turnkey, that it's easy, that it's scalable, that's elastic, that it's easy to adopt, it's easy to move away from if you want to, right? It's transportable. There's all these other things. And so when we talk about modernization, there's obviously all the technology modernization, right? Moving to containers, as was mentioned before. We're actually seeing a lot more, when we say hybrid cloud, there's also multi-cloud. So people want to be able to go from AWS to Azure to Google Cloud Platform, and then potentially to others. We actually saw it a lot amongst retail customers, right? So AWS was way ahead. And then the retailers really had no choice. If they wanted to go to the cloud, they kind of had to go to AWS if they wanted to use services, but they didn't want to, right? They saw Amazon as a competitor. And then having the choice now with Microsoft really being in the game and Google joining as well, that competition allows them to, I think what we're seeing is it's more important for people to be able to move. So that's part of the modernization as well. And ultimately, and this, was mentioned a few times when people talk about self-service. Self-service, of course, there's the obvious definition of it, which is, I want to go do what I want to do. And, obviously Tableau and Power BI, I know those have done a good job there. But it's also about, evolving to really focusing on the business use cases and accomplishing the business use cases, and the technology kind of follows, right? And so again, getting a little bit away from the old dogma of being altruistic for technology's sake and more towards delivering value proposition and working with the business users. Is the big shifts that I'm seeing.
That's a good point. Good point. Ravi, anything to add? Or?
Yeah, from a modernization perspective, you see that many of these customers moving onto the cloud, and Saurabh kind of talked about all these multiple different cloud vendors. There's a challenge that actually comes out to me, in the computer world, we've all been around for a long time. So every solution creates its own problem after a few years, right? So right now, the problem with so many vendors kind of coming on board is that there are different strengths each of these technologies clouds have. So, for example, Microsoft is very strong on the business side. If you talk about people doing data science, they prefer to the Google Cloud. And then you have, Amazon as the generic one, and now we have Oracle for the Oracle applications and so on. So from that particular perspective, then it becomes a problem for them. So I want to run some workloads in Amazon. I want to run some others in Azure. So, and also if there's a geographic component to it in terms of they might prefer to run Azure in Asia or in Europe, and they keep Amazon here in the US. So the modernization kind of brings about its own set of challenges. And that's where I think it's very important as the technologists kind of map their journey to the cloud. They need to be able to make sure that they have a strategy, a neutral, I would say, a data layer that will allow them to be able to move things because things are going to change rather than being tied to something else. Because right now you're going to incur like egress charges once you come out of a cloud. So that's why these guys are going to hold you on to their cloud and don't want you to leave, right? So by having a more strategic enterprise data layer, you basically solve the problem of being able to go with whatever cloud you want, depending upon the capabilities or the location, and then be able to move the data around very quickly without having to incur any egress charges. So I would say to keep that in mind as people plan their strategy to the cloud.
Yeah, there's a business model aspect, a commercial part of it, and of course, there's always technology that plays into this. Ramesh, any kind of final words on modernization before I move to our next question?
Yeah, you mentioned three interesting things: business, technology, and commercial. But I think there is also a cultural angle to this, because a lot of people seem to think about deploying cloud solutions or modernization towards cloud, but they seem to carry out a lot of mindset that they currently have in the data center. Just a simple example: the network team wants to control the network, the DBAs want to control the databases, the server team wants to do something. So that is not going to hold good any longer. I think that's the fundamental cultural shift that's required for large enterprises. I don't think small enterprises grapple with this. They might, but I've seen this in some big enterprises' mindset. I think that's very, very, very important, besides having the chops to solve the technology problem. But that's it. Yeah, in terms of modernization, there's a whole lot happening, right from data platforms to microservices, containers-driven application solutioning. It's pretty exciting, and the spectrum is pretty wide.
Yeah, we're all in a good space right now. I think data and data warehousing and analytics all is in the hot seat right now, which is great. And you brought up an interesting point, Ramesh, about silos, and those are going to have to come down. And I think they're continuing to be challenged, but they'll have to come down for all this to really work, right?
They absolutely will. If we're aspiring for efficiency, agility, and speed with technology, those walls will be stripped down.
Yeah, great. All right, let me move to our final question for the session. What advice do you have for customers to improve their future competitiveness? And Saurabh, I'll start with you because I know you've spent some time. I've watched a webinar that you did around hyperintelligence, and I found it very fascinating about some of the things that you're thinking about from a product and a services point of view. But how would you extend that? What would you coach a customer to kind of think about starting to future-proof?
Yeah, this might sound a little bit like fluffy, but the truth is the biggest challenges that we see over and over again, and Ramesh brought it up as well, is it's really cultural, right? And you have to, the most important thing that you can invest in as whether you're an IT team or whatever project you're on, is making sure that there's stakeholder alignment and a clear direction for where you're trying to go. And again, that sounds like just an obvious thing to state, but if you start with that, if you start with very tight teamwork with the business users, know really what the business outcomes are, and then work your way back to the tech, and realize that the business goals will change as people come and go and as the world changes. The technology is kind of second. And that's kind of a wonderful situation that we're in right now. It's like you can do almost anything. There is a ton of technology out there. And actually, things have diversified so much that you can choose from a number of different vendors, all the way from the database, sorry, Yellowbrick, but all the way up to the BI vendors like us, right? And so the one thing I would leave everybody with is maybe two things. One is work, like really it's human. Work with people, work with the business users, work with your stakeholders, be transparent, right? That's the first part. And then number two is maintain flexibility in whatever technology choices you make. because we talked about hybrid cloud. Hybrid cloud is really about flexibility. All these things are about flexibility, and if you maintain flexibility, then you might acquire another company and you'll be able to absorb whatever other tech they might have. And so at MicroStrategy, for what it's worth, we believe in data federation. We believe in things like hyper-intelligence, where you can inject insights into other people's applications. You don't have to go entirely to our stack or anything like that. So I definitely recommend being as independent and flexible as you can, and adjusting as you're working with the business users on their outcomes.
No, that's some pretty good advice. Ramesh, what are your thoughts?
So I think the obvious things about all the cutting edge things that are happening on public cloud is a no-brainer for anyone if you're advising customers about being future-proof. All the things around MLA, MLOps, DevSecOps, data platforms, BI tools, all that is given. But I think it's also important for customers to understand and be tuned into what's happening in the open source world, because a lot of evolution of products that we're seeing on the cloud space has some invariable connect with some open source. So I don't think customers should be not plugged in with open source while they're pursuing hybrid multi-cloud solutions with the public cloud providers. And then there's also so much evolution within the product space, especially data processing products, right from Yellowbrick, which is the first one to do bring database instructions into Flash. So these things are going to change the game foundationally, as you understood technology in the data center, let's say 5 years ago, from all the way until 2014 or 2015, right? So those things are getting redefined. Now, how does those redefinitions of your ability to process data at such lightning speeds mean to you in the modern context? So these things, I think, these kind of breakthroughs are very vital for customers to be tuned into as they invest, because at the end of the day, it's all about change. You invest today with a vision of being invested in the future for the next 4 years, but how do you deal with the breakthroughs and changes from now to 4 years, within those 4 years? I think that's the key part. Yeah.
So that's part of what Saurabh was talking about in terms of having a little bit of agility and the ability or flexibility is probably the right term, about how you're going about solving that particular problem today, and think about, it's going to change in the future. And so how do you prepare for that? Right. How
Absolutely.
do you keep that option open, right?
Yeah. And one last thing is, what with my observation is, the tech stacks, complex tech stacks, multi-billion-dollar worth solutions, all that is good. But I think the biggest problem enterprises have now is about data, which is metadata, which is data governance. This becomes like a supremely important aspect for the enterprise when you talk about multi-cloud.
Yeah, that's great. Actually, that's a great lead-in, Ravi. So when you start talking about data and data movement and data governance and where you're at, what would you tell a kind of a customer to help prepare?
I would talk about if you want to maintain your competitiveness, you want to be more agile organization. You need to have the flexibility. We all know the notion, the story behind the dinosaurs. They became extinct because they were not able to adapt. Especially in the current year, you look at how the budgets were basically cut on the IT side. The staff was actually reduced, and I'm actually seeing many companies who are very agile to make the change very quickly to be able to pivot are the ones that have actually sustained. Some of them have actually thrived. A lot of businesses have actually gone under in this particular climate. So I would actually leave with three things to consider for technology teams as they prepare for this agility and the competitiveness. Number one, have some kind of a data abstraction and intermediary layer that separates from the business side from the underlying technology. Technology is going to change, business is going to change. They move at different paces. You don't want to tie one to the other very tightly. So having an intermediary layer helps with the flexibility. Number two is reduce the data points from the source to the destination. So you have the data that is you're collecting. The business users, the analysts need to be able to quickly know the data. So when we had to change, we were extremely prevalent on the trade shows. That's how we were actually generating a lot of the leads. That all disappeared very in a matter of days, and we had to quickly pivot in terms of the virtual events. And I went back to my team asking for statistics on how well we have done, what type of virtual channels have worked well, and so on. To be able to get that such a data in a quick, short amount of time is very important, going from the source to the destination. And the last thing along those lines is the real time. So we can't wait to get the data, days or even hours later. We want the data immediately, because as the business leaders, we want to make the decisions and put the right processes and policies in place that will move the business in the right direction. So without that, we will all become dinosaurs.
That's great advice. We all want to move forward. We want to move positively. We're in this to not only help our customers, but we're in it to make money. So that's all good. So we've got a kind of running in the end here. Are there any, Ramesh, 30 seconds, what would you want to tell somebody that you haven't said already? Anything? Is there anything you'd like to share?
Oh, I don't know. It's a tricky question. Yeah, just give me a buzz. We'll talk.
All right. Excellent. Good. That's nice. How about you, Saurabh?
I just say throw out your assumptions, right? Like this is the big, aside from obviously the human tragedy, but from a pure business perspective, this is one of the biggest experiments of our generation. Everything we thought was true is maybe untrue. It's all very questionable. And so throw out your sort of old dogma and assumptions and, give things a try, A/B test things, be super flexible. The world will change again. But I think there's all kinds of opportunity around us right now for us to sort of seize and be successful.
That's awesome. Thanks. How about you, Ravi?
Yeah, I would say, as I mentioned before, right now, the budgets have been cut and staff have been reduced, and the CIOs basically start hunkering down and they start keeping the money, not really spending it on the innovation. I would say there are technologies that will actually help lower your TCOs and be able to provide you the innovation. So I wrote a blog on that one. So cloud, data virtualization, these kind of technologies do enable you to keep the competitiveness while reducing your costs. So don't be shy about spending in those funds and continuing to innovate. Just be more creative. That's what I would say.
Outstanding. Thank you guys for participating in the discussion. A lot of good insights. I think there's a lot for customers to go think about, leveraging your experience and what you guys are hearing across the board. So again, thank you so much for joining. Thank you for the audience for participating. And at this point, I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to you, Jeff. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Great job, everybody. Really good stuff. So with our last panel, we did this. I don't know what your guys' schedules are like. We have a little bit more time allotted. We did just like a little organic 5 to 10 minute where you guys just kind of talked and asked each other questions and just kind of sought some insight and maybe anything that kind of like sparked in your mind that you weren't able to talk about as a little bit of bonus content that we'll offer to attendees after the event. Is that something you guys would be willing to do or interested in? Is there any questions that you might have actually, or is
there anything else, guys?
Not so much questions. I didn't answer the last question, but I heard Saurabh and Ravi answer. So something triggered in my head. I thought, okay, I'll just.
Are you going to record this?
Yeah,
I'm going
to. You don't have to record. This is just fine.
No, this is exactly what I want. You guys just kick Bhuvan and I out, and you guys just talk for 5 minutes.
No, the question was very loaded. The question that Alan asked was very loaded. We talked so many things. No, I was just thinking that as one important thing, or among the important things that we want to advise to customers who are going to public cloud is always have the ability to roll back. Like by intent, by design, you engineer your approach in such a way that you can yank yourself out of cloud A, go to cloud B, or yank out of both clouds, come to on-prem. You need to have those chops in your approach. Otherwise, it could be, a lockdown with bad contracts.
It's lock-in, right?
Yeah, it's like a bad marriage. So I think it's important to think about this as you navigate. Yep.
I think that's right. Cloud lock is real. depending on how you've developed your ecosystem. And I think that was part of the early movement into cloud was I can get rid of a data center, but then all of a sudden, oops, I'm now either in AWS and I can't get out, or I've got so much invested that now I'm stuck, right? So I think you're right. And I think people are a lot smarter, and I think that's part of the education process that's gone on with the cloud, is people start to really understand the implications, both from a lock-in perspective, but also the commercial implications about how much it really costs and how you manage it. And I think cost management, which we don't talk about, but is a big deal.
It's a big deal. It is a big deal.
It's a big deal.
Yeah.
It was my last startup was in and around that cost management. That is a big deal. That is a big deal.
And the very fact that earlier when we discussed, even Ravi brought that point about truly a hybrid cloud environment is where you already have a private cloud. And we know private cloud innovations are not pausing just because public cloud has come, right?
Yeah.
Private cloud will continue to make some progress. So this ability, this pre-baked ability to fall back into the data center with certain, let's say, data assets and processing of those could find you newer rewards in your private cloud if you're running into a problem with the public cloud. So I think all these things kind of help.
Yeah, no, that's good.
Let me throw one question to the panelists. Years before, US maintained the competitive edge on the technology side, and then we would see Europe lagging a little bit, and then Asia lagging even much more than that. But now with the cloud being spread across all over the place, I'm kind of seeing, for example, in Asia, they are innovating more on the AI side than we are doing here in the US, especially like in China and Japan and so on. So do you guys actually see the technology gap between the different three major continents kind of going down?
Well, it really depends, right? So if Asia isn't really that uniform. So if you look at Asia, for example, a place like Korea and Japan, they still have a culture of purchases for the long term. So when they buy something, they expect it to run for 20 years. And so that's kind of one, the decisions you make when you're buying something for 20 years is one way. Whereas if you're looking at, for example, Australia has always been known to be one of the early adopting markets. So I think, first of all, the Asia Pac does kind of vary a bit. I guess what I'm seeing is, in a really beautiful kind of a way, it's every company and every group within the company kind of has its own style. Like, it's not so regional as it used to be. You've got companies in the United States that some of them are very, very innovative, some that are not so much. In Europe, you've got companies that are super innovative and some that are not so much, and the same as Asia and Africa and other parts of the world as well. At least that's what I'm seeing. It's not so geographically split as it is kind of maturity of the company, the spirit of the leadership, and the people. That plays a bigger role nowadays.
That's an interesting observation. I think you're absolutely right, Saurabh, that as people are moving around in companies, they're bringing kind of that blend. And so it's opening up, I think, a little bit more around, risk-taking and innovation that allows the, companies to move forward. So I think that's a really interesting view.
Yeah, and you're seeing a lot of cross-pollination across country. Look at this panel, right? I lived 12 years in Paris. Before that, I was born and raised in Canada. Now I'm here in Washington, D.C. I've moved around a lot and that's a very common story nowadays as well. So people are moving, ideas are moving. It's not quite as segmented as it once was, which is awesome. It's really great.
We could do a virtual summit, and we can do a panel discussion, and we can all be in different places, and it's been awesome. Yeah, it's
and that's another key point is, when we did customer councils and things like that, historically they were regional, right? So it's like, let's get everybody in this region together, and hopefully they have something in common. But actually, technologically, they didn't have that much in common. They just happened to live in the same area, right? But now we could do a customer council and just kind of get the time zone right, and it's more on a topic where they actually do have a business scenario or a technology in common. So it's really interesting. Like, again, throwing away some of the old ways of doing things, it does open up some new doors.
Well, and you can also get into more of a verticalization, if you will, in terms of a conversation about adoption of technology and how you might be able to help a whole vertical kind of move together if you're really lucky, right?
Totally.
Yeah. Yeah.
What about you, Ramesh? Are you seeing any regional differences in your business?
On the services side, I don't know that there is a definite answer for what you're asking, but the way I look at it is overall, right, Ravi, that yes, the ability for someone sitting in some country in Asia to access, let's say, tensor cores, okay, which wouldn't have happened before, because now public cloud is becoming available. Like, all these public cloud providers have built data centers and continue to build more data centers in Asia and other parts of the world, right? So the ability for people to play around with the new tools and capabilities that are coming up in the MLAI space has become significant. So whatever creative solutioning that can come out of leveraging these tools, I think that those creations are happening, mushrooming all over the world. But the advent of tensor core itself, right, is largely happening still in the US. And in other words, the core technology breakthroughs are still happening mostly out of Silicon Valley or North American region, but the adoption and embracement of those now has significantly increased because of this ability for people to access complex programming constructs and firmwares, hardwares, name it. Yeah.
That's cool. All right. Anybody else have a question? Want to tease out?
No, this is good.
Oh, a lot
All
of fun.
right.
Yeah.
Welcome to Yellowbrick, the only modern data warehouse for hybrid cloud. 100 times faster performance, thousands of concurrent users, and petabytes of data. Get faster, richer, more accurate insights, all while saving millions in costs. Yellowbrick gives you the power to make the right decisions, the ones that vault your business ahead of the competition, now and in the future. Schedule a demo at yellowbrick.com.